I came from a very Jewish, even Orthodox, but modern Orthodox background, and very Zionist on both sides. On the side of my grandmother, my mother, and my father's parents were very Zionist. My mother was born in Palestine. Her family, her grandfather and his sons and daughters came to Israel in what's called the first Aliyah in 1881, 1882 from Kiev. He had been a rabbi in Kiev. My mother was born in Zichron Yaakov, which was one of the first colonies, where her grandfather was the first rabbi there. Her father, who was supposedly an engineer, was in charge of draining the swamps of what's now Hadera. And he died of malaria there when she was 3 years old. And she was forced with her mother and the two sisters, they went to live in Jaffa at that time. And they bought a house, or built a house right by the sea between what's today between Tel Aviv and Jaffa. She went to a teacher seminar there. My father's granduncle, whose name was Ariel Hurwitz, came to the States at the end of the 1870s, early 1880s. He made a lot of money. He started bringing over his family, his brother's children, etc., from Lithuania. The family was from Lithuania, somewhere near Kovna. My grandfather was the last one to come. He came at the beginning of the 20th century with, I think, only one daughter. His eldest daughter, who was only in her teens at that time, probably to keep house for him. And then he brought over, a couple of years later, he brought over his wife, my grandmother, and the rest of the children, including my father. My grandmother was the mainstay of the family. She was quite a character. She was a small woman. I don't think she was 5 foot high, and she certainly didn't weigh even 100 pounds. But she led the life of the children to the day she died in her 80s. And they were very devoted to her. She made all the decisions in the family, including for my grandfather as well. I was very attached to her, actually, despite her dominance. But we got along very nicely together. I admired her a lot. I was by her a lot. I used to, as a young boy already, she taught me at the age of 8 or 9 how to give her shots of insulin. She had diabetes. I used to give her shots occasionally. My father was also diabetic. I used to give him shots also because she taught me how to do it. My father must have come over at, I think, something like 1905, 1906. And he got his education in the States. He got a public school education, he got a yeshiva education. And my father got his ordination as a rabbi from a well-known Orthodox yeshiva, the Yaakov Yosef in Brooklyn. But he also had a Ph.D. From Columbia University. He did his doctorate on, his thesis was on Spinoza, the Jewish philosopher, Dutch philosopher, famous one. So he was Orthodox, but he was very modern. He was very educated also. And so was my grandfather as well. So my mother, I said, was born in Palestine on the eve of the First World War. After she graduated the seminar, although she was only altogether 16 years old, I think, at that time, she went to visit a sister who was her sister and her sister's husband were teachers of the Alliance Israel school in Port Said in Egypt. And she went to visit them at the beginning of the summer of 1914. Then in August, the war broke out. And Egypt was on the British side, and Palestine was on the Turkish side. And there was no way of getting home. She wouldn't get home until 1919. For 5 years, she was in Port Said. She only returned home at the beginning of 1919 after 5 years of absence. She became engaged to some engineer from Haifa, and she was supposed to marry in 1920. And her other sister, Hannah, who was also unmarried as yet, was supposed to get married a month before her. And Hannah, when she was doing some cooking or something, a primus, a kerosene stove, blew up. Her hair caught on fire and she died. And my mother told her fiancé that, she wants to put off the wedding. It's supposed to be the following month. She wants to put it off for a year. He says, now or never. She said, forget it. So they called off the wedding, and the family, sort of, it was a crisis, obviously. You don't want to get away from all the problems. Her uncles, the Yoshua and Boris, etc., were in Paris at that time. Other aunts were in New York. She was in Paris for about a half year. Then she went to the States. And when she was in the States, she missed speaking Hebrew to somebody. She went down to a group of Hebrew speakers who met, once every few weeks to hear a lecture. And she met my father there. And that was the end. They got married. Probably 1920 to 1921 they got married, I imagine. I had an older brother called Carmi. The first one, his name was Carmi, but he died at the age of 3 or 4 from spinal meningitis. And then my sister was born. I have an older sister by the name whose name was Edna, but she came to Hashomer Hatzair, and they thought Edna sounded to them too much like an American name, so they gave her a Hebrew name, supposedly, of Aliyah. And everybody knows her as Aliyah to this day. I was born in 1932 in Binghamton, New York, but I have no recollection. At the age of 1 or 2, my family moved from Binghamton back to New York. And from then on, most of the time, practically all the time, except for 1 year, we always lived in the East Bronx, near the Bronx Zoo, near my grandparents' house. My first school years, I went to public school. From the 5th grade through the 8th grade, I went to a yeshiva, a modern yeshiva. It was called the Yeshiva Salanta in the Bronx. There weren't many yeshivas in the States at that time. And there we studied a half day in the mornings. We used to study Jewish studies or Hebrew studies until about 12:30, and then we'd eat lunch, and then we'd have English studies till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And at the age of 11, I joined Hashomer Hatzair for a short period of time then. My sister had been in Hashomer Hatzair. She joined a few years before that, and my brother was in for a short period of time as well, my older brother. And then I joined it at the age of 11, but both the fact that I was becoming more and more religious at that time, and the Hashomer Hatzair movement was going through a lot of problems at that time as well, because all the Madrichim, the leaders of the movement, the male, were being drafted into the army. All that was left was the women. We had a group there with a woman leader. She wasn't for the boys, for 11-year-old boys who were full of energy. She wasn't the one for it. So I left, and I left for about 2 years. I left the movement. And then I graduated the yeshiva at the age of less than 13. And question where I'd go. I decided to go to Bronx High School of Science. You have to take a test to that. But I was accepted to Bronx Science. And I had already, part of the reason that I didn't was because I started questioning my religion. My break with religion really at first was mainly, not for convenience sakes, not even to be in Hashomer Hatzair, which I had a lot of friends there, but mainly, let's say, philosophical, ideological, if you want. I started asking a lot of questions I didn't find. And besides which, the fact that I grew up in a milieu of Orthodox people, all my father's and my mother's friends were Orthodox rabbis, Orthodox teachers, Hebrew teachers, and all that. And I saw all the hypocrisies of it. That opened up a lot of eyes to me. The rabbi of my synagogue, I won't mention names here, who was also one of my teachers in the yeshiva when I studied in the yeshiva, suddenly disappeared, and turned out he ran away with a young woman to Palestine, left his wife as an agunah. That means she can't get remarried again. A lovely woman. My mother used to take me to visit her occasionally. This is what they're teaching us about Jewish morals, etc. Ran off, left his wife without a penny, without anything. She couldn't do anything. I don't know what happened in the end with it, but that was a big shock for me. But there were other things as well that I saw and the questions that I asked, and I didn't find the answers. I left and I went to Bronx Science. When I went to Bronx Science, I went back to Hashomer Hatzair also. And just a few words about it. I went to Bronx High School of Science, which was really an amazing school at that time. It was considered really probably the best public high school, at least in the United States. They used to have Westinghouse scholarship winners every year. With the first 2 or 3 were always from Bronx High School of Science. We had some wonderful teachers there. People who both had knowledge and knew how to teach as well. In the meantime, I said I'd join Hashomer Hatzair again. And at first, at the age of 13, my first leader in the movement then was, interestingly enough, a person who was in the armed forces. He was a sailor, a member of Hashomer Hatzair from Chicago, who had been stationed as a medic in a naval hospital in New York. And he told Hashomer Hatzair he's ready to be a youth leader. He's free on the weekends. He's ready to do, except once in occasionally he has a duty, but otherwise he's ready to do it. He's got some free evenings as well. So he was our leader for about a year, and he was perfect for us at that age. Afterwards, we had a madrich, a leader, a man by the name of Meir Jaffe, who, besides being our leader, he was also the secretary of the Hashomer Hatzair in the United States at that time. He had just come back from the army. And he was this exception. He was this wonderful person. And he introduced us to all sorts of places and things in New York that we never knew. It was really a very opening experience for us. He used to take us to plays, free plays in different places. He took us to dancing, he took us to concerts, he took us to see things that we never saw before. He took us to see Shimmels on the East Side and all these places. And it was, we discovered the world with him. He really was wonderful. He was with Moreshet for about 2 years, and then he made Aliyah, and he was a member of Kibbutz Galon. At the age of about 15, 16, we joined together with a group of girls. So we had a joint group of boys and girls together. A wonderful group of girls, some of them also, the ones who are alive in any case, many of them very close friends of mine to this day, though they're living in the United States. Gradually also we began, as we started getting older, at the age of 15, 16, 17, we started meeting the people of our age from around the city. There were 3 branches of Hashomer Hatzair in Brooklyn, there was one in Manhattan, Newark. That was in the New York branches of Hashomer Hatzair. And we had members there, we became very close. We had my little clique of 1 or 2 people from Borough Park, 1 or 2 people from East New York, and 1 or 2 people from Brighton, and 1 or 2 people from Manhattan, and a few of us. We used to do a lot of things together. It was a very exciting time, and I became more and more involved in the movement. And Hashomer Hatzair, at that time, at the age of 15, 16, 17, used to involve us the whole weekend, and sometimes some activities in the evenings in the middle of the week. That evening, not by chance, there was a conference or a congress or whatever it was, or an assembly of the Histadrut in Manhattan Center. That's one of the big, that was planned from long before, and obviously now we all went down there. We was dancing in the streets and et cetera, and then we went into the building, and they started the, whatever it was, the assembly, and then, and the place was packed and everybody was happy and singing, and then Chaim Weissman walked in, almost blind. Somebody was leading him. And he was the personification of all, the whole dream. And suddenly, I never had an experience like that before. The place became totally quiet. And everybody, from the youngest kid there to the oldest, everybody started crying. For about 5 minutes, everybody in the whole building was crying. They weren't rejoicing anymore. Everybody was just standing there crying. It was like your old grandfather came in, and that was more or less. I saw my grandfather in him. By the way, they looked a lot. If you saw the picture, they had a resemblance. They had the same beard. Maybe he took it deliberately, my grandfather, who knows. And that was a very moving experience that remained for me for years. By the age of 16, when I really became completely involved in the movement, and I graduated high school a little before the age of 17. So I had to decide what I'm going to do when I graduate. By deciding that I'm going to Israel, and I'm going to the kibbutz, it meant that, for me, preparing myself. So I'm not going to go into academics. But at first I thought, my first thought was to study building. You're not going to study agriculture in New York City. And when I graduated high school, science, I went to a new school that was opened at that time by the New York State Academy of Applied Arts and Sciences, something like that. I was really taking a lot the veterans, war veterans, and I was going to study building construction, not to become an architect, but a person who could do building in any case. And I went there for a half year. The academic studies there were a joke for me. I mean, it was, I was getting hundreds without even moving. Things that I studied that I did well in 10th grade, I was studying again now there. There was no point. And I decided that's not it, I'm going to quit. And I went to work. But in the meantime, I had gotten the New York State scholarship. I don't remember how much it was. I went back after a year. I went back to City College, and I studied there for a year. City College is also an amazing place. I was really active in the movement all the time. I was working as a youth leader, and I was active in all sorts of things in the Hashomer Hatzair, and it really took up a lot of my time. There was one year I figured that I was at our camp in Liberty, New York, which was a summer camp only, though we had a winter program also, but in preparing the place and building it and doing all sorts of things there, I figured out I spent almost a third of my year in there. Simchat Torah, we used to go to the Lubavitcher. And we used to go with our Hashomer Hatzair uniforms, the blue shirts and so on, and they loved us. We used to be with them, we'd do the hakafot with them, we'd sing and dance, and after the hakafot were over, the young Hasidim used to go out to Ocean Parkway. They used to make 2 lines holding hands to stop traffic, and we used to dance in the middle, Israeli dancing. They loved us very much. Anyway, in 1949, the Lubavitcher Rebbe at that time, that's not the Menachem Mendel, the Mashiach, but his father-in-law, Yosef, I think, Yitzchak Yosef, I don't remember his name. He was very old, and for a number of years, he didn't come down. He used to sit upstairs, and they'd come up to see him. Whoever had, once a year you could go up to see the rabbi and all that. But generally, they didn't see him. One of the Gabbayim comes down to us, and he says to us, the Rebbe wants to speak to some of you people. I said, what? The Rebbe wants to, the Hasidim look, they see him once a year, it's a big treat. He wants to speak to you. Send 3 people up. I don't remember who the two, I'm still trying to find who the two other people were. They were probably older than me, that's for sure, because I was only 17 and a half at that time. Going on 18. But I went also because I was, I came from a Orthodox background, they thought maybe I could get along with them best of all, I could speak, whatever it is. We went up to this dark room, a little bit of lighting, and this wizened old man is sitting there like this, bent over, and he starts talking to us. And he says to us like this, he says, you from Hashomer Hatzair, you think you're not religious, but you, with your simchat chayim, your love of life, with your love for the state of Israel, for your morals, I don't remember all the other things he said. He says, you're more religious than those who steal and cheat and lie all week long and then come to shul on Shabbat. I was in a state of shock. By the way, he spoke partly Yiddish, partly English, and most of the Yiddish I was able to manage with, he was easy enough to get along with. That was his message. And then he ends off by saying, he says, you and us, he says the future of the Jews in America there's no future for them. We're losing them all. We're losing all the young people today. Another generation too, there won't be any more Jews left in the United States, he said. He says, you and us, we've got to get together and reach out to the Jewish youth and bring them back to Judaism. They succeeded, we didn't, but they succeeded. Look, in the meantime, things were happening. Besides the creation of the State of Israel, the Korean War broke out, and America started drafting people to the army. The question was within the movement, or among the people themselves, what to do. They're going to be called up to the army, and everybody will disperse, and the group will fall apart, and who knows what's going to be, and they need us in Israel now, and they decided to start going on Aliyah, that is to go settle in Israel. And at the end of 1950, the first ones started moving to Israel, from the older ones in any case. And then by the beginning of 1951, people from my age group who were also eligible for the army service started going. Why I didn't go then? I didn't go till 1953. They couldn't send all the leadership there. It was a problem, and they asked me to stay. There was at that time, the American government gave a draft deferment test. It was a test, to see how you are, and according to the mark you got on that test, your draft board could take into consideration exempting you from army service. I did exceptionally well on the test. I always was good at tests. I came out probably one of the top ones in the Bronx on that test. And the draft board, they said, you can keep going until your Ph.D., don't worry. Any case, so they started going, but I remained behind to be a leader in the youth movement. I was in charge of the group in the Bronx, and I was on the national executive, though I was young. And then they decided, they asked me to go to Toronto to run the movement in Toronto, and they wanted to bring the person from Toronto to New York to do the jobs that I did, and also to be the editor of the movement magazine. They had a journal. He would have been good for that. So we actually exchanged. I went to Toronto, but I had to continue my studies. So I supposedly studied at the University of Toronto. Things started to get tight, and then in the end it was decided I'm going on Aliyah, and I decided also I'm going on Aliyah in 1953. At the end of the school year, more or less, I went at the end of May 1953. Went on Aliyah, and at the door when I left the house, my house, I had packed up and left the door with my suitcase already. My father came up to me, obviously, with my tefillin and my talit and sidur, says, take it with you. I said, all right. I put it in my suitcase. When I came to the kibbutz, and I put my stuff to the clothing store in the kibbutz, what we call the komuna, and they had the mark, and I opened it up and I saw this on top. I was sort of embarrassed. I kept the kibbutz when I bring my tefillin, and I said, oh God, I forgot my father. They said, so all the men brought it from there. All their parents gave it to them before they left for Aliyah. She says, we have a whole pile of them somewhere. I got to Galon, and went into to live in a room with 500 or 600 people. I don't remember. It wasn't that big a room either. Just no place in a wooden shack, actually. Though we had a toilet for us. My first night at Kibbutz was an experience. I went to sleep, and this is the end of May. Something like May 30th, I went to sleep. And I woke up in the morning, I said, it's strange. I thought that by May, June, there's no more rain anymore. They said, no, usually it's not. It's not. I said, I heard thunder last night. I said, that wasn't thunder. There was a battle right near Bet Kufrin, about 5 kilometers away from us. The Jordanians had come into that was the Jordan border at that time was the hot border, really mainly. And there was a fight with tanks and artillery, and I thought it was, what did I know what it sounds like? Yeah, that was my introduction to Israel in any case. The minute I came, I really felt at home. I felt that was my place, there's no problem for me. That's where I should have been. The first year I worked in all sorts of different jobs. Then I went into the army in October 1954. I was inducted to the Israeli army with a group. There were 11 of us from the kibbutz that went together, and we did basic training in a camp near the Carmel Mountains. It was gorgeous. It was near we were under the Tira. It was by Tira. It's about 15 kilometers south of Haifa, and you see the sun setting over the sea. It was beautiful, but the training was very hard. And but we got along nicely in the basic training camp. There were about 700 recruits there at that time. Close to half of them were from Hashomer Hatzair groups from around the world, and mainly from Israel. An outbreak of jaundice in the basic training camp. A lot of kids fell sick, and went to the hospitals and all that. I was me and 2 others were the last ones to get it, and being that the wards were already filled, they sent us to a different ward, and we had a wonderful doctor there. So I ended up there. I went back to the very end of the basic training, and then we were sent as Nachal. All the different platoons were sent to different places on the borders of the state of Israel. And we were sent to a kibbutz called Bet Zera, which is near the Sea of Galilee. We were there. In any case, I worked at the beginning because they didn't want me to work in hard work. I worked in the kitchen. I don't know why with jaundice you work in the kitchen, but all right. And one day I was washing dishes, and there was this young kibbutz woman next to me standing there. I'd soap it and she'd throw it into, and she'd take off the soap and, clear water. And I threw a glass cup into there, and it broke. And she cut a finger. And I grabbed her hand, and I married her. I grabbed her hand, and eventually I married her. That was Sipora. From holding her hand, and I guess something must have gone there. But we started meeting together all the time, despite my platoon commander trying to make troubles. But we weren't there that long either. We were there for about 3 months. And Tzipor and I started going together, seriously. The truth of it is, I had a chavira in the States that I left behind, but it broke off. She's in Kibbutz today, not in Galon, in another Kibbutz. The situation along the Gaza Strip became very difficult at that time. So they sent us down to a kibbutz called Magen, which was near the Gaza Strip, right near the Gaza Strip. And we were there. It was a kibbutz that was it was even more impoverished than Galon was. It had been set up during the War of Independence. And so it was only maybe 3-4 years after the War of Independence even. It was only about 3 or 4 years old. Romanian Jews. They were nice, but they were very Romanian. But they really were living in poverty. I mean, the dining room was, which was the shack, when you went in, when they opened up the doors and you went in, everybody ran to try and get a knife because there was only 1 or 2 knives there altogether. You went to get a fork because there weren't enough forks to go around. Otherwise, you ate the entire meal with a spoon. But I asked to work in Kibbutz Nirim, which was considered at that time one of the outstanding young kibbutzim in the country. I asked to work in Kibbutz Nirim because they had first of all, they had a wonderful dairy. They had the best dairy herd in the country. They also had the first meat herd of cattle that were being raised for meat. And I thought that if I learned the business in Kibbutz Nirim, maybe I'll set up, because there was talk of doing that in Galon as well, that I'd come back, I'd have experience and help set up a meat herd in Kibbutz Galon as well. And they agreed. And I used to go every day. I was a cowboy. I used to go out into the fields with this big herd and herd the cows, usually a whole day from early morning to evening, generally. One day I came to the kibbutz for some reason we weren't supposed to leave till later in the morning. And I came to the kibbutz, and about a little while after I came to the kibbutz, the Egyptians suddenly began a bombardment of kibbutz Negrim, like what's been the last few years along the Gaza Strip in general. As far as I can remember, I think it was probably the first bombardment of the Egyptian army along the Gaza Strip, but I may be mistaken. There had been lots of other incidents, but bombardments there weren't. Anyway, the kibbutz, everybody was ordered to go into air raid shelters. I was standing outside or at the opening of an air raid shelter, and after about an hour and a half of bombardments, suddenly the bombardment stopped for about a half hour at least. It was quiet, so I went down to see what's happening with the dairy herd. Are we going to take them out, not take them out? When I got down there, they told me that they got orders that to take out the dairy herd and the milk herd and bring all the cows to a place outside the kibbutz in a wadi where they could be away from bombardment. And so we started taking them out. There were 5 of us that started taking them out. The person was in charge of the meat herd, a wonderful person, Shifroni, a young man, but very capable, and an young Australian woman who would come to join Kibbutz Negrim, and 2 others in any case, from members of the kibbutz, and myself. And we started taking them out, and after we started moving, suddenly instead of bombarding the kibbutz, the Egyptians decided to bombard us instead. And I saw shells falling in the fields nearby. It didn't impress me too much. It was, it was off a few hundred yards each side. I didn't realize that they'd finally zoom in on us, but in the end, a shell fell right in the midst of the herd and us. There were over more than, something like 90 cows were killed right off, and a few horses were killed as well, and all 5 of us were wounded badly. I came out the best of them all. Shifroni, the one in charge, died on the way to the hospital. The Australian girl and another member of Kibbutz Negrim lost their legs up until the knees. The 4th young fellow was injured badly in the stomach. And I broke 2 legs, an arm, and I lost part of my chin as well, my jaw. And I was in the hospital for quite a while. And Tzipora, both of us were having a relationship. She used to come visit me practically every day in the hospital from the Jordan Valley to Hashomer Hospital until I got out. And when I was released and I went for the Army sent me to pattern up a bit somewhere, in the end they said they're releasing me from the Army. Though supposedly temporarily, but it was, the idea was, that's it, you finish more or less. So we were out, and Tzipora and I got married. We got married actually in her kibbutz, which was also nice. We got married with 2 other couples on the banks of the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, and the party in the evening was in her kibbutz. There were 3 couples. They made a very big party, and when the party started, I sat down. Before that I drank a little bit, not very much, and suddenly all the tables start swaying and the lights start swaying. I said, what happened? I didn't drink that much that I got so drunk. Turns out there was an earthquake, really a serious earthquake. The arrangement was that she'd come to Galon for half a year, then I'd come to Bet Zera for half a year. I didn't stand on my part of the agreement, it's true. She stayed in Galon in the end. And always reminded me that I never carried through on my promise, but she's right. And so we came to Galon. She was, meantime, she became pregnant, and I was working at that time with the dairy herd, with the milk herd, like I wanted to do. We started the milk herd. I used to go out every day to the fields on my horse, and come back in the evening. It was sometimes myself, sometimes somebody else as well. It was really a long day, but it was nice. It was fun being outside. But it was, for a year, it was fun. After that, I imagine it wouldn't have gone on so well. But in any case, Tzipora was pregnant, and after a year, after I'd come back to the kibbutz, actually, I had been released from the Army. Suddenly, they called me back to the Army. They said, you have to advance training. And my group, who I'd been with in the Army before, they were already coming out of the Army, and I was going back into the Army at that time. And I was in advanced training in the Nachal, parachute training, though I didn't, because I had a lot of shrapnel still in my leg, I haven't to this day, they didn't allow me to jump, but I did all the training with everybody else. and I remained with the unit in any case. And this is already, I'm speaking spring and summer of 1956. Things were becoming very tense along the borders in Israel. All the borders, actually. Actually, at that time, again, the Jordanian border became a very hot border. There were a lot of activities of the Palestinians across the border, and my unit took part in a number of reprisal raids. In the beginning of October of 1956, October 10th exactly, the night that the kibbutz was celebrating its anniversary with a big play that they were putting on, I was in a commando raid, a big one, actually the biggest one that was before the war, in Kalkilia. And they gave me something to do there that I thought I'd never come out alive, but in the end, the last minute, cut it out in any case. But in that raid, we lost the company commander, the second commander of the company, 2 platoon commanders, and the company sergeant major. And that night, not a single one of the simple soldiers was even wounded. Afterwards, 2 weeks later, we were already in the Sinai campaign. My company was the first one really over the border into the Sinai. The paratroopers battalion jumped at the Mittler, but we were supposed to hook up to them. So I was actually in the first vehicle that went into Sinai there. We captured a place called Bir Tamid, and the company was supposed to hold the position there until they said something else. And we were there. There was a battle there. I mean, we had a battle there. It went not so badly. For us, it was easy because all the Egyptian officers ran off. They ran off, left the soldiers to fight. So we had a very the ones opposing us were not in the best of mood. They surrendered eventually after a short battle. Yeah, that was the Sinai campaign. After the Sinai campaign, my battalion was sent down to hold Shem HaSheikh. Yeah, and they told us we were going down for 2 months. Sipor was supposed to give birth any day, and I went to my battalion commander, my battalion commander, because I couldn't speak to my company commander. The one that I had, who I was very close to, was killed, and the new one was a character. So I went to Motago, who told me, he says, tell that schmuck that you're staying here. You're not going down. Yeah, which was interesting. But so I stayed in really about a week later. Shlomit was born, my firstborn daughter. She was born on the 10th of December. It's about a little over a week after the war ended. And but I was still in the army, and I was in the army till March, when I came back. And that's it. I came back to the kibbutz. Again, I went back to work with as a cowboy for a while. No, for another year at least. I'm sorry. I worked then. Sipor used to come out and meet me when I'd come back on the way back from the fields. I'd take Shlomit on the horse, and we'd come back with the cows. And then I began working by chance. They asked me to work for a little while with the dairy herd. I didn't want to, but they said, we have a shortage, just for a period of a month. But I liked it, and they very much wanted me to do it. It was much more variegated. The work in the dairy herd was very. There's a lot of different things you had to take care of. The hard part of it was that you started milking usually either 3 o'clock in the morning, or you milked also in the evening, which meant milking till 10:30 at night also, which wasn't the most pleasant, most comfortable thing in any case. But I liked the work very much. I became involved very much in the cultural life of the kibbutz. I organized a amateur theater group in Galon, which was fantastic. One year we won the national award as the best amateur theater in the country. In 1959, I was asked by the Hashomer Hatzair World Movement to go as a shaliach, as an emissary to South Africa, to the movement there, on an emergency basis. We went in any case. We went in the period of the apartheid. It was, for kibbutzes to live in South Africa in the apartheid wasn't very easy. We worked there. We had a nice movement going there as well. Shortly after I arrived, there was the major incident, which was called the Sharpeville, where something like 10,000 Africans in protest went to the police station in Sharpeville, and as a gesture they were going to burn their identity cards. And the police opened fire on them. Something like 70 or 80 people were killed by the police. The police said they were being attacked, but it's not true. Everybody that was killed with a bullet in their back, in the back of their head or in their back. We worked there. We had a nice movement going there as well. So that was it. South Africa was an interesting experience. In 1961 already, South Africa broke away from the British Commonwealth. They set up a republic, and they had a big ceremony. They were preparing a big ceremony in Pretoria, in the capital, on the day that they proclaimed the republic, and they wanted an honor guard there of the youth movements. In the English, it was the Boy Scouts. From the Boers, it was the Voortrekkers, which was their youth movement. Voortrekkers really means more or less Chalutzim, pioneers. And from the Jewish organizations, they wanted from the Zionist youth movements, Habonim, Beitzar, and so on, all of us. And we were asked to participate. And I brought it up to the older members of the Hashomer Hatzair. I said, listen, you people have to decide. You're going to have to live with it. Some of you are going to make Aliyah, but you're not leaving for the Aliyah yet. It's the future of the movement here, and the ones that stay behind, you're going to have to face it. You have to decide whether you're going to do it or not. I'm not going to take part in the discussion. Whatever you decide, I'll abide by. And they said, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to be an honor guard for the South African nationalists, who had been, by the way, who had been a leading anti-Semite during the time of the Holocaust. He was an anti-Semite. Hashomer Hatzair used to, back in 1944-45, they used to organize whenever he came to Johannesburg, they'd organize the Jewish kids to demonstrate and run them out of town, more or less. They said, no, now they want us to be honor guard, we're not going to be in there. They didn't. And the truth of it is, Hashomer Hatzair, because of that, not only because of that, because of generally the situation there, it didn't last much longer after I left, another 2-3 years, 4 years at the most. And it was too much pressure from the government and the Jewish community and so on. It was a problem. That was South Africa. While I was in South Africa, my father passed away in the States. I wasn't able to go there. When we finished in South Africa, we went to the States by boat, first 2 weeks by boat to England, and changed over to the Queen Mary and went to the States. And my kids got measles on the boat. First it was Aliyah on the way to England, then Shlomit on the way to the States. And when we got to the States, we got there in the middle of the winter. We got there in January, and it was snowing outside. And my father passed away. My mother was in Florida, and my brother and one of my cousins came to pick me up at the port. But when we were approaching New York, when we were off Long Island, and the immigration came aboard. When we got into the port, I went up to the immigration, and they told me, there's 2 gentlemen over there that want to speak to you. I looked over. The 2 gentlemen were, it was like a caricature, long green coats they had in their pockets. It was FBI agents in any case. And I went over to them. I said, what's the problem? And they said, there's a warrant out for your arrest. I said, a warrant out for my arrest? For evasion of the draft? No, there's a warrant out for your arrest. We have to arrest you. They brought me down to the assistant district attorney. And they're standing there, and he starts questioning. He says, he asked me a question. He asked, where do you live in Israel? I said, Galon. He said, is it a kibbutz? I said, yes. He said, in Hebrew, he says to me, Eze miflaga. I said, Mapam. He says, oy vey. So I went to prison for not 24 hours, less than that. And the next day I was before a judge, a federal judge. My lawyer gets up in front of him. He says, listen, he's been accused of, draft evasion. He wasn't an invader. He's gone to the fight in the forefront of democracy for America and in the Middle East, and he was in the Israeli army, and he was wounded, and he fought for democracy there. The judge was nice, and he let me out, but I had to stay in the country for a half year until the government decided to drop charges, which they did. That was in the end. They dropped charges. They saw there was no point. No prosecute. They dropped charges, but that was it took almost a half year to be. In the meantime, the central shaliach in the United States at that time, a man by the name of Dov Zakino, who was a member of the Knesset afterwards for a number of years, a nice man. We became very good friends. Asked me to stay on. Being that I'm there, to organize and run the Hashomer Hatzair camp in Liberty, New York that summer. He didn't rely on his other shlichim. He wanted me to do it, which I did, and it was a nice experience. Then we came home. We came back The night that we came back, the kibbutz, the drama group that I'd organized, put on a big play in our honor, which was wonderful, something special. And that's it. I went back to life in kibbutz. This is 1962 already, in the summer of 1962. And I went back to work with the cows, and Tzipor was in charge of the dining room in the kibbutz, the kitchen actually, and the dining room, the whole food place. And the kids were growing up. Shlomit had a hard time getting back into the kibbutz. The fact that children didn't sleep with the parents, it was a little difficult for her, and at the beginning for half a year till she adjusted. Galia, who had never been part of the kibbutz system, always lived with us until she got to the kibbutz. She went in one day, she didn't want to leave. She stayed there all the time, slept the first night already, then adjusted wonderfully to it. 1963, after we returned from the States in South Africa, Shaul, my youngest son, was born. And we were getting along nicely, the family growing, and it was warm and pleasant, and we were doing well. And then Galia, something started happening with her. We didn't know what it was. And we went to doctors, and nobody really knew. And it was getting very serious. Sometimes when she got into crisis, she couldn't move her hands practically. She couldn't walk. She couldn't swallow, so she choked. And nobody knew what it was. And finally, a young doctor who's resident in the mouth and ear and throat, he was the first one to understand that it was myasthenia gravis. No, everybody else, each one said, I was the one who found out it was myasthenia gravis, but we know it was him, the young doctor at that time. He then became a very famous doctor in his field. But they still, in effect, didn't know how to handle it. Because the problem with the myasthenia gravis is that it can be handled with a medication called mestinon. But the crazy part about it is if you give too much or too little, you get the same effects. She was in a bad crisis at one point, and in the end it was decided that we have to take the expert in myasthenia gravis was a doctor in Mount Sinai Hospital by the name of Osserman. We flew to the States, me, a doctor from Kaplan Hospital, and Galia were all the way to the States. We worked full time, the two of us, just to keep her alive with taking resuscitation and breathing and everything of the sort. It didn't stop for a minute. And there they took us straight. There was an ambulance waiting for us at the airport, and they took us to Mount Sinai. Galia and I, we were there for about 3-4 months in the States with that. Only I was the one. I decided on a medication. Even when she was in the hospital at the times at Kaplan, doctors knew. They left it up to me to decide, and I decided. And she had a couple of good years, and then she got into a crisis again. And there was one day that I was in Tel Aviv at the Kibbutz headquarters, and among other things, I went into the headquarters of the World Movement of Hashomer Hatzair, and they told me, they'd been telling me for a long time that they wanted me to be a shaliach, an emissary to the Hashomer Hatzair in the States. And I said, no way, I'm not going. I was already in South Africa. I did it once, that's enough. And I've got a sick daughter also. I'm not going. That's it, I'm not going. I came back home that evening, and Galia had been in the hospital. The truth is, she had been in the hospital at that time. Turns out about 6 o'clock, I get a phone call. There weren't phones in people's houses, but I was called to the phone in the kibbutz. And they said, Galia's in a crisis. Your wife is with her. Tzipora was with her all the time. Your wife is with her. She's in a crisis. You have to come immediately. I came. And they were working on her till something like 12:30, 1 o'clock at night to keep her alive. And when they got through the real crisis, the head of the department, a wonderful South African doctor, by the way, Stanley Levine, who really took wonderful care of her, he said to me, listen, Ariel, I know you're a member of a kibbutz, but you have to find some way that you could be in the United States for a few years with Galia, because she needs to be under the treatment there. I said, okay, no problem. And that was, after that, I learned, since then I learned you never say no. You never know what's going to be another hour. And I phoned up the next day, I said, okay, I'm going. And I went, and the truth of it is, it was the period of being a shaliach at that time was a wonderful period. It was after the 6-Day War. And whatever you wanted to do, you went. I mean, the movement was growing tremendously. I personally opened up a new branch in Boston, a new branch in Spring Valley, a new branch in Philadelphia, a new branch in Chicago, which had been closed for a number of years. And I did that for 3 years. And meantime, Galia's condition for the 3 years that we were there was was stable. She only once had a little bit of a crisis, which was also an awful experience of hospitals in New York, but we got through that. And but aside from that, she was fairly well. And in '71, I was supposed to go back, and I finished the summer camp, and we were waiting for the leadership training camp to open. And suddenly, for the first time since we've been there, more or less, Aliyah went into a crisis again. I don't know what turned it off, but she went into a crisis. And it was a Friday night, and one of the other shlichim drove for me. I went with her to Mount Sinai. And the next morning, her doctor called me. He said, Ariel, he said, you can't go back now. You have to be here for another year. He says, you're not going to make out of her a Beit Hari. That's what he knew. He says, she's not sure. She has to stay in Israel another year. We were already packed. We had everything ready to go back. I'd given my apartment over to my replacement. I didn't know what it was going to be, but we had to stay. He says, no way. She can't go back now. So, in the meantime, in addition to that, I didn't say, a year before that, Shlomit, who had been with us for 2 years in the States, said, that's enough of the States. I'm going back to Israel. I'm going back to the kibbutz. I'm going back to the high school in the kibbutz. Yeah, so in the Jewish agency, they said, look, we're trying to organize a group of Jewish high school students. There are a number of high school seniors that want to organize an organization like we have for college students. Maybe you'll work with them. I agreed, and I went to work with what became the Jewish High School Alliance, where I met the two outstanding people. They were Marc Schuman and Shifra Brunswick, who were both seniors at Ramaz High School, and a group of other activists, many of them from Ramaz. And it was an amazing thing also. It was the same thing, the same period of time where really anybody who had an initiative and had ideas and really were organized could do wonderful things. And I was just the back supporter for the young people. They began putting out a newspaper. They got to a circulation of a couple of tens of thousands, right, of issues each time. In December, they decided they're going to open up a pre-Jewish high school that is to meet twice a week in the afternoon after high school classes from 4 to 7 or whatever it was. And in Midtown Manhattan, they got a wonderful place. This is all their initiative, and they're fantastic. In any case, we opened up the pre-Jewish high school. They talked about it in December. In February, beginning of the new semester, it already was open with a few hundred kids who took part in classes on all sorts of subjects. They had lectures, and it was a wonderful experience. Just whatever they did, it went. They try to introduce Jewish studies into high schools and try to pressure principals to accept the idea of opening Jewish studies, because that was a period of time where black studies were introduced into high schools throughout the country. And they said, well, for black studies, why not Jewish studies? We have the same right, and they did it. And try to organize groups all over and have representatives all over, and it was amazing. One of the most interesting activities just showed how they had organized themselves in 1972 with someone I don't remember what month, it must have been about March or something like that. There was a terrorist attack in Lud Airport, in Ben Gurion Airport, where some Japanese terrorists actually blew up bombs, and a lot of people killed. The next morning, which was a school day, a number of them came to the offices there and said, we got to do something. Maybe we'll organize something by the Iraqi embassy, and we'll protest. No, we decided that's not the point, but what we did want, and what we decided is to demonstrate outside the Air France. It was an Air France plane that was the pilgrims had come on, because they didn't have security. The only company that had security was El Al. I decided we'd have a demonstration outside the Air France offices at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. About 700-800 students came to the demonstration, and we were the only ones demonstrating. And being that it was a news item, And it was New York people that were killed there, the Puerto Ricans, so the stations wanted to have something that they could see. They weren't there when it happened, but they wanted something that they could put on TV, and all the leading TV stations came there. And they asked me, who could we interview? I say, CBS, interview Marc Schuman. NBC, interview Schiffer Brandnik. ABC, interview whoever it was. I don't know what it was. And everybody, they got a terrific coverage. And they had a good effect. Next morning, I came into the offices in the Jewish agency, and I got a phone call from the consulate. They said, tell your kids to call off any more demonstrations, because we said we're going to come back every day, which we weren't planning to do in any case. We're going to come back until they do something. He says, tell the kids to call off their demonstrations. The Air France said that they'd agreed to any arrangements, security arrangements that we asked them. At the end of the year, I came back in any case. I went back to work with the cows. And Gali was doing pretty well. She was adjusting. I mean, she had to take care. She had to take medication every few hours, but she was doing very nicely. And we were back with Shlomit, and Shaul was growing up, and so on. And then there was the Yom Kippur War. But I was the secretary of the kibbutz. I already was secretary of the kibbutz before the Yom Kippur War. That is, I started in the beginning of '73. I started as secretary of the kibbutz, and which was a hard time, both because people were gone, but also we lost 2 boys in the Yom Kippur War. A number of the young people were wounded. A number of people were in the army for a number of months, away from home and so on, and away from work as well. And I at the same time that I was secretary of the kibbutz, I was in charge of the dairy barn also for that year. So it was a pretty hard year for me then also, but not bad. After that, I did that for two or 3 years. I don't remember. I think 3 years actually. It must have been 3 years. And I went back to my cows. And then there was a problem. In our high school is in a kibbutz close to a half hour away from Galon, called Kvar Menachem. My daughter lives there today. And the school was, at that time, everybody in the school, all the students in any case, studied there and also lived there during the week. That is, they'd go home once during the middle of the week, and then they used to go home for most weekends. Sometimes there was a weekend in the school, but most weekends they were there. And that's it. And so there was a position, besides teachers for the different subjects, every class had what we called an educator, who really was like a big father to the kids there, and organized activities and had activities in the evening. Galon had to give another educator. They said, we have to give another person to be an educator in the kibbutz. They asked me to do it. I said no. I said I want to work with the cows. There was a third time, they decided again, they brought it up. The third time they brought it up, I gave in. I said, okay, I give up. And I said, all right. They said, listen, you have to be an educator. That's a half-time job practically, usually. And I said, look, what do I do the rest of the time? I'm not going to just do that. I want to teach then. What am I going to teach? Mathematics or history, which I liked. I said, history. All right, so I said I'll start teaching history, but I had no college degree. At that time in the kibbutz, it wasn't that important. Today it's very important for everybody. I had no college degree, and I started as an educator of a class who was then entering 10th grade. I was with them from 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. A lovely group of kids. They were really, I got along with them wonderfully. In the evening, I'd return, not every evening, but at least 3 or 4 times a week. I'd come again in the evening, have activities with the kids, my class on all sorts of different things. I'd also, as it was in those days, we used to work every once in a while as a class. We used to go to pick oranges or something like that. I finished with them, and then the principal of the high school said to me, listen, Ariel, next year, we don't need you as an educator. Why don't you go and study for a year? The high school will pay for your studies. I said, to study for a year? What am I going to do? I didn't have a BA yet. Even. I had some. I said to go and study BA studies, it's not for me. When I was a shaliach in the States, an emissary in the States, I used to lecture a lot in universities. I lectured in classes with BAs and MAs, doctoral classes. I even once, in the University of Pittsburgh, I once took part in a international postdoctoral seminar that went on. I used to speak about topics like the Holocaust and Jewish history, and the kibbutz and Israel and so on and so forth. I said, am I going to study again? But with these 20-year-old, 23-year-old, 25-year-olds. It's not for me. I don't. No point. I said no. I don't really want to do it. If you don't need me next year, I'm going to go back. Milk the cows. What's the matter? I love doing it. And they said no. They kept pressing me. So I figured, I figured, maybe they don't trust me. I mean, I thought I knew enough history that I could teach history, but maybe they're not sure. So I said, all right, I'll go study, but on one condition that I go into, that they agree that I take MA course. Yeah, I'll try the Hebrew University. And in the Hebrew University, they have the Institute of Contemporary Jewish Studies that deals with Holocaust and Jewish community studies and things of the sort. And it's an MA in the doctoral program there. I said, if they let me, so I asked them. They said, they knew me. Two things they wanted. They said, yeah, being as a master's in a doctoral program, you have to be able to write, not just to study. Do you have anything you could show us? And I had a couple of articles that I'd written, some that I'd written as BA articles papers that I did in the University of Toronto. One or two were very good in my opinion. And an article that I'd written for some journal. And they read it and they said, okay, fine. And they said, all right, so you could study, you could take classes with us. And at the end of the year, we'll decide what we do with what you study, whether it'll go towards your BA or towards your MA or, well, we'll see. Okay, I said, fine. And I started studying that year in Hebrew University with some wonderful professors, mainly Professor Yehuda Bauer and Yisrael Gutman, who international names in the Holocaust studies, but a number of others as well. Not all of them were great, but a lot of it was very good. And I really enjoyed it. And at the end of the year, I did very well. Also, I had a very high average I came out with. And at the end of the year, they called me down and sat with a couple of professors. I don't know whether I should say this thing, but they sat me down. They said, look, about the future, we suggest that you don't do an MA. I said, all right, I don't care. It wasn't important for me. And they said, go straight on to a doctorate. I said, doctor, I don't have a BA and I don't have an MA. I said, that's all right, we'll take care of that. And so in the end, I ended up doing a doctorate in Hebrew University without a BA and without an MA. I went back to teaching in the high school again, another class. I was an educator and so on. I used to teach classes in the morning and then go in the afternoon to Hebrew University and then come back and have activities with the class as an educator in the evening, and then just get home at, 11 o'clock at night. It was pretty active. I don't know how Tzipora put up with it, but she did. Well, I was at the Institute of Contemporary Jewry, so it was obviously that I'd do something on the Holocaust. And for me, it was really interesting. I mean, they were the outstanding professors. I could have gone in another direction also. People ask me if it's because of Tzipora whether I started doing it, and it's not really the case. Somewhat. I mean, her story gave me. Tzipora was always ready to speak about what she went through during the Holocaust as a child. If a person wanted to hear it, but she never pushed it in any way, neither in the family or with others. But if you asked, she was open. She had no problems talking about it. And again, the question is what I was going to get my doctorate on. Originally, I wanted to do something that then nobody had dealt with, and that was to deal with the people who had gone through the Holocaust and were DPs at the end of the war. They were in DP camps and so on, coming to Israel. And that was a completely empty field at that time. And I thought it was important. I didn't want to deal with the heart of the Holocaust, and now I think back of it, it was too much for me. But with that, I wanted to deal. And I had a meeting with Bauer, and he was a member of Kibbutz at that time, Shuval. I remember went to the house. I said, listen, Yehuda, I decided to do this. He says, fine, it's a good idea. He says, but you're going to have to go to Poland for a couple of months to do that. I say, why do I have to go to Poland? He says, all the material is there. I said, all the material is there. I said, in Yiddish, some of it, which I knew somewhat. I had studied a bit of it. And in Polish as well, you're going to have to study a little bit of Polish. I said, if that's the case, I'll do it on America. And he said, fine. I went to the States to do the research for a period, I think also 3 months, if I'm not mistaken. I got a nice scholarship from Hebrew Union College. They had some very good archive there. And I was there for free the whole time in Cincinnati. And all the the institutions of American Jewish Congress, American Jewish Committee, B'nai B'rith, the Agudat Yisrael, whatever you want, and the FDR papers, and the Library of Congress, and the National Archives. I went through all those places and got whatever I could get, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it very much. And I came back, and I was going to write my doctorate. And when I came back, the day after I came back, I think it was the day after, if not the same day, A close friend of mine said, Ariel, listen, I'm on the nominations committee. We want you to be secretary again. I said, are you kidding? I go, you got my doctor? He said, yeah. And they said it's important. There's no one else. Blah, 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 blah. And I agreed. I agreed to do it, which unfortunately it was a mistake. I really shouldn't have agreed to it, but I did. And it put it off. And then I was asked to go again on an emergency business to be in charge of the shlichim of the kibbutz movement in North America. The only person that could go, that the Jewish agency would agree and, accept, without going to a course and all that would be me. And I agreed to it then because I thought also, all right, I'll finish off while I'm there. I'll be able to work in the Zionist archives every once in a while. I'll be able to, in the summertime, maybe have a week or two of vacation. I'll be able to go again to the archives in different places. And I'll finish it off, which I did. And I did it for 2 years. I didn't enjoy it. I really didn't enjoy it. I didn't like the work I was doing there. Though it was a different time than in the late after the 6 Day War, and it wasn't enjoyable in any case. But I did it, and I did it 2 years actually. And then I stayed for another month or two to start writing. I gave my paper in 1988, I guess. So I was too old to teach and go into the university. That they told me. They said, we'd love to have you, but they won't accept it. Hebrew University won't accept you at your age to start a career in the university. But I went back to teaching in the high school, history, and I started teaching the Kibbutz seminar, teacher seminar college in Tel Aviv. I was teaching both places at the same time. And intellectually, the high school was much more challenging than there, except for the teachers who would, come back to do their degrees. Afterwards, I started teaching also at the Open University. I taught a course, an MA course, a course at the end of MA for about 8 years on teaching Holocaust and Genocide in Israel and in the world, which was a wonderful course with wonderful students, and I enjoyed it. The best of all my years of teaching. Those were my best years. I had wonderful classes, generally, and I learned a lot there myself, but that's for another time. Program that Yair Aron and I worked on for the Ministry of Education on genocide. Amazingly, we put it out within a half year. We put out a program, actually a book for teaching the subject. The first classes were supposed to start teaching on the 15th of December, and a week before that, a committee of the Ministry of Education that deals with history got together after they had the program for who knows how long, and they decided to veto the program. Then I taught a course on genocide for a group of teachers, really a very good group of teachers. I taught a course on genocide, which I liked very much, at the seminar Kibbutzim. And afterwards, they asked me to teach a course at the Open University on teaching the Holocaust and genocide in Israel and in the world. A program that, again, Yair wrote the course for, and I taught it. And the first year that I taught it, there were 5 students. The following year, there were already 20 students. They, unbelievably, I'm sure it's a world record. Last year, 1,700 students around the country were studying a course on genocide for a BA course, which is amazing. I don't think there's a place in the world that has that many, which just shows the interest and really the work that Yair Aron did for that is wonderful. Towards the end of the 1990s, I took over as editor of Yalkut Moreshet. Yalkut Moreshet is the longest running journal on Holocaust studies in the world. It was started in 1960. There's none that ran consistently from that time on besides ours. And after a number of issues, I started putting out what I always believed. I started putting it out in English as well. For years, I had thought that I had published a number of articles in Yalkut Moreshet also before that. And it bothered me the fact that it's a wonderful journal on a very good level, but it only goes to Hebrew-speaking students. Nobody else knows about it, or historians, or they may know about it, but they can't read it. And I decided to start putting it out in English, which I did a number of years ago. And in the moment, our Yalkut Moreshet is put out both in Hebrew and in English. That's the kind of work I've been doing now. But really looking backwards, we've done a lot. The country's developed tremendously. I mean, from the period of time when I came, there were the mabarot and the standard of living in the country and the conditions and the bureaucracy and everything. And it was really, there was a feeling of brotherhood, that's true. But everything else was pretty lousy. The country really developed. the standard of living, that Israel has become one of the major centers of modern technology. It's amazing, and the Nobel Prize winners and the Israeli literature that's developed, all the writers and the universities, and there's so many things, and the cities and the roads, and we've developed a lot. I really, I am proud of it. I think we've done a tremendous job. Not sorry for a moment that I came here. I could have lived differently if I was in the States, but it makes no difference to me. I really am happy what I did, and I'm glad I was part of this thing, of what went on in the country, and building it both and defending it as well. What concerns us now is really, it's a hard time today. We're really living in a lot of feeling, a lousy feeling in the country. And of course, it brings you back to nostalgia of the days, when there was a feeling of everybody being together, and it's just a matter of time. We'll change, and we'll become one community, and so on. We'll take care of each other. It starts really off with the question of peace in the Middle East, or peace for us in the Middle East, in any case. For a long time, I've been active in the shaliach, Peace Now movement, and supported. And the mistake was awful after the 6 Day War. What happened? We were euphoric, but there was a reality, and we should have faced reality. And interesting enough, Ben Gurion himself was in favor of returning all the territories to the Arabs at the price of achieving peace. And as long as we have that as a problem, it's a problem. It tears the country apart, and the settlers become very militant. And I don't know what the solution is. Every time the solution becomes more difficult, because the population grew from a few hundred to a few thousand to a few tens of thousands, now to a few hundred thousands, and who are very militant, and there's no possibility really of leaving them behind. That's those some people talk about. There's no possibility. That's a script for future conflicts as well, and to bring them all back, how to make them come back, and how to settle them in terms of economically, financially, I don't know, and how to get to peace with the Arabs. At the moment, it's very few people in Israel have any really hopes about it coming about. I want to believe it can come about, because it has to come about eventually. I don't know at what price and how, and under what conditions, and whether it will be forced to do it by the superpowers or by something else, but it has to be. It can't continue this way, because it's destroying Israeli society. It's destroying Israeli democracy. You can't live. Look, Israel isn't an apartheid state in terms of Israel itself, but it's a colonial state in terms of the way it handles the West Bank, and it can't continue that way. Then there's a need for a two-state solution, and it must be. So that's the first problem. The second problem that really bothers us very much now, it's becoming stronger all the time too, and it's got a lot to do with the atmosphere after the 6 Day War. It's the question of state and religion. And the ultra-Orthodox are growing stronger all the time, and their numbers are growing. Demographically, they're winning out. They were a very small part of the population, and they're growing all the time. And even the Orthodox, who were not ultra-Orthodox, have become more and more ultra-Orthodox as the time goes by, and then they're trying to impose a lot of things upon Israeli society, which was a secular society. It still is basically a secular society, and it doesn't go, and it leads to a lot of conflict, and it leads to a lot of. But in terms of the numbers, they're going the right direction. I mean, we're going to win out, and the question of how to maintain an Israeli army when most of the population is going to be either Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, that doesn't go into the army at the moment, or Arab. And even bringing them into the army is not a simple solution. And I don't know what's going to come of that. And then there's the tears within Israeli society. And Israeli society, which was so egalitarian 50 years ago when we came, has become among the most extreme in terms of the differences between the rich and the poor. And it's not only the poor that's part of the problem. The other part, though, generally the standard of living of everybody's gone up, but the middle class is really in a fix. They feel very tied in, and they have hard times getting housing, and the situation is getting worse, and it doesn't look good for the immediate future either. With the middle class, the problem is that if they don't find a home here, they feel they can't build a house, and they're not living the standard of living that they expect to do with the work that they do. They're really hard. They work hard, very hard. This is one of the hardest working countries in the world in terms of the amount of time people devote to work. And both the men and the women work in the secular part of society, in the middle class. If they don't feel they could do it here, then they'll leave. And we know that's happening. We had this tremendous brain drain already, and it could get worse. And we have people with many skills, highly well-educated, and skills in electronics and skills in medicine and in sciences. And if they leave, and one of the nicest things about Israeli society is really the family. That's one of the things that keeps them together here also. It's a very society that's built very much on the family values and close relations, and it spreads out to a wide family altogether. But that's it. I don't know what's going to be. I mean, the situation in the future, as it looks at the moment, isn't good. But I've learned as a historian, you can never tell what's going to be tomorrow, really. Nobody could predict tomorrow. And we know that the pendulum swings once this way and once that way. Maybe it takes a long time to that, but it's hopefully. And I hope I can see the change coming about in my lifetime. I don't have that many more years, but whatever it is, I hope it'll be. And I guess that's how I sum it all up, my life. Todah.